Well, 25% isn't bad, if you look at it that way. But that's what the defendant did. 1 out of 4 times was he able to comply with the instructions. 1 out of 4 times was his motor coordination sufficient to complete the task he was asked. One-legged stand. Well, I move back and forth. Probably think it would be difficult even for me to stay in one place at one time and hold my leg up for 30 seconds. You've heard a number of excuses as to why the defendant couldn't do that in this case, why he hopped up and down or leaned against his leg, why he bounced back and forth and lost his balance. Anything from the medical records, which you've heard about in this unrepaired ACLU tear, which, by the way, didn't appear to have stopped him from serving his country. And that's a good thing. As I said, he is a good man with a good job who served his country valiantly as a Marine. It stopped him from being able to stand on this one particular night, although it didn't stop him in doing much else in his life, especially when the officer asked him if you had any medical conditions or if you're on any medications that would prevent you from performing these tests. At the time, he said no. In fact, the officer gave him the opportunity to use either leg. And he chose to use that very same leg, which before you today you hear is the subject of an unrepaired tear that makes it impossible for him to stand on that leg. Even in the best of all possible lights, if that were the case, then on that particular evening, it's just another example of poor judgment that Mr. Augustine exercised in choosing the wrong leg to stand on, if he in fact knew that that leg was a problem. And he loses his balance again on the 9-step walk and turn. A very simple exercise, which he again counted methodically and performed to the best of his ability in his impaired state at that time, losing his balance as he turned, flapping his arms up and down. You've heard that it was very windy. You've heard that it was very cold. It was 28 degrees. As you've seen as well, Mr. Augustine is not a small man. You can use your common sense. You can use your life experience. It may be difficult for you to see the wind blowing an individual of his size around.
Objection.
Could he have been? Similarly, one might think that 20 to 30 minutes in the cold might wake an individual up, as opposed to make them more tired, which at least is one excuse we haven't heard tonight for his failure to pass these tests. Although it could also, I suppose, explain the glassy eyes. Sufficient space to perform the tests. Not many other cars on the road. Well lit. A dry area. 4 tests, 4 failures. And the observations physically made by the officer of an individual in an inebriated state. The Commonwealth's burden of proof is to show you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant in this case operated a motor vehicle on a public way, and you've seen through the testimony of the officer that he was in fact operating the black car on Route 2 in Lexington, a public way, under the influence of alcohol. Now the judge is going to explain to you through jury instructions what the Commonwealth's specific burden is and what we need to have proven. But essentially, as I stated earlier, being impaired is when your ability to operate a motor vehicle safely is diminished. The opportunity to respond, to reason, to react, use motor coordination, judgment, all these aspects which we take for granted on a daily basis, things that we do without even thinking, things that field sobriety tests are designed to measure. All these things that Michael Augustine was unable to do on the night of March 2nd. Good men make bad choices. Better men take responsibility for them. That's what I'm asking you to do today.
I'll move from this trial in a minute.
Right. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Judge Rufo, could you comment on the examination of the officer by Kevin Sandra? And then, very briefly, about what impressed you about the final argument?
Well, I think that the examination, sometimes we get lulled, because we do it all the time, and not me as an attorney, but certainly just watching the participants, and the officers have done it, but the jury, and what Judge Cock and I do all the time, is we love this part of it, is we go in afterwards, after the verdict, and ask the jurors if they have any questions, comment, criticism about the process that we can possibly answer. And oftentimes what I get in response is that this is a first time ever experience for most jurors, and that they sometimes feel that direct examination is almost robotic. Not that that was what it was, and here we are with all learned people, but that they sometimes get a feel that the Commonwealth, and Kevin was very effective at this in his closing argument, the cards are stacked against the average person because it's the government versus John Q. Public. So that's a difficult thing for the prosecutors and the officers to overcome, because the public comes in with that image and that sense and that feeling that the government is holding all the cards, even though in our pre-charge we stress the whole aspect of beyond reasonable doubt and what the government has to prove and the elements of the offense. So Sean was an excellent witness, obviously had all the knowledge that he needed to get out all the elements, and I think that, I guess from TV as well, that sometimes jurors just, it just blur, it becomes a blur, it goes right by. I don't know if I'm getting my point across. Closing arguments were obviously excellent. Kevin did what every good defense attorney does, and that is capitalize on what he got by way of cross-examination and put it back in front of the jury in such a nice, neat package that the jurors again, are beginning to reflect on some inconsistencies with respect to what happened that night and explaining away. That's the classic explaining away and eroding the Commonwealth's case from that point. So those are my comments.
Judge, do you have anything?
I think, and both of them are superb, obviously, that's why they were invited to today's proceedings. But I think a direct exam and a cross-exam, to be really effective, you have to have a certain theme. And I think Kevin, as well as Sandra, you could tell what their themes were and what their closing argument was going to be just by the nature of their questions. Cross-examination, how many times did Attorney Reddington mention that the guy was nervous? That whole theme with the jacket to suggest that the officer was being less than reasonable and less than fair and less than objective when he stopped him. I mean, those were his themes. That there was a third thing that I wrote down as well. Oh, the whole idea of the speed trap. And so you set up through your questions what your final argument is going to be. And Sandra did the same, had the same approach. From a judicial point of view, it's so frustrating when we see attorneys, and I call it the shotgun approach, in the sense that they ask all these questions and they don't have a theme. They seem to approach a direct as well as a cross-examination, just trying to ask as many questions as possible.
In picking up on that, one of the things that you might want to consider, in every case is a report. And a simple thing like the license and registration, you want to show the bias by showing that the report only contains incriminating facts. And you ask them directly, this report only contains incriminating facts. Absolutely not. Well, you didn't say he did a great job taking out his license and registration, did you? And what you're doing by that is you're testifying. And you're getting the point across that this is not some objective witness who happens to be on a street corner when a bank is robbed. We're all human beings. He has a bias. He has a prejudice. I'm so pleased to be able to have gotten Sandra and Kevin here to see how this is done, because this is a model. And I'm suggesting that you use it as a model. Don't use words because they become affectations if you duplicate, but apply the way they advocate to your own style, to your own personality. What questions do you have? Now's the time to ask the experts. Yes, sir.
Sandra, in her closing argument, I got her last comment read.
I moved for a mistrial. I whispered. I did whisper to Dick. I said I'd move for a mistrial on that.
I didn't hear it. Good men make bad judgments, better men take responsibility. And that really leads to the question of when, and this is a practitioner's question, when do you make objections to closing arguments? Do you interrupt? And this may be a question of style, and I know judges have their own preferences as well.
Question of tactics
When do you
also.
make them, and what's the appropriate place, in your opinion, to make those
I would not generally object in a closing, or an opening for that matter. You'd really have to, I mean, I've tried a lot of major cases, and Joe Goggin and I, we go way back, we banged each other around many a courtroom over the years, and I would never really interrupt the other attorney for two reasons. Number one, I think that the jury would still kind of hold it against you as being ungenteel or whatever if you were to interrupt the other counsel. Number one. Number two, any objection that I have, I'm going to take care of it at some point, either in the course of the trial if it's an opening, and if it's in a closing, that's wonderful, because then I'm going to be all over them like a new suit on a motion for a new trial or to mistrial the case. I would object to all of these things. Commenting, for example, on real men take responsibility, well, that's like in a rape case saying, well, you know, I mean, he should have pled guilty or admitted his guilt because we put the alleged victim through all of this. Real men do not, you know, try cases, apparently. I mean, that's kind of a comment that I would argue is commenting on a defendant's right to a trial. It's fundamental, it affects the judicial process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, sir.
I'll just say one thing, don't ever interrupt in Judge Coffey's courtroom. I tried that once and I learned how to do that again.
But I still like you, and we're still friends.
Anyone else on either the examination of the officer or final argument? Okay, yes, sir.
I'd ask Mr. Reddington, the question, after each test, when you ask, you didn't have an opinion then. I haven't seen it yet happen. I wondered, what if the guy says, yeah?
Oh, then you can turn it around on him and say, well, then why did you bother to go through all of the, you know, well, I wanted to be fair, or, well, and also, I've never really seen one where they haven't always said, you guys don't listen up there. I've never seen them say, yes, I did have an opinion. He was so hammered that, you know, I thought he was under the influence. No, they're always trying to be, you have to make sure that it's couched, that, you know, you're trying to be fair, you're trying
I'll
to be
tell
open-minded.
you where they get that. If you read the field sobriety manual, it's right in there. They're told to hold off their opinion until after they've given, for some reason, I don't know why they do that, but they do it.
You can take the pulse of the case, too. You know if the guy's really, you know, unable to stand and he's staggering, and you're not going to ask that question. But I find that to be a very effective question. And if you notice, the subtlety of it is you let him go you string it all the way out for like 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5, and you never ask the last question.
The thing is, that kind of thing is devastating, too. You find, because at each juncture where it's asked again and again, the jury's getting the idea that, well, at this, and still you didn't find it,
Yeah,
and
that's
still
right,
you
yeah,
didn't find
yeah.
it, and so you know. So what was that one huge, large thing that finally pushed you over the edge? And it's
Push.
always something small at the end
Yeah,
when you look
right.
at it. And I think that's why Kevin's cross especially was so
Let me give you a
effective.
theme on that. Let me give you a theme on that. It took them 20 minutes to figure out this guy was under an influence. What I tell them is, folks, you and I know what a drunk looks like. It takes us about 3 seconds. It took him 20 minutes. This is a very unique case. Okay, so that's the theme. Yeah, go ahead.
It does say, after the first one, I wonder if either judge would consider at that time you ask the sidebar and say, hey, it's custodial at this point, everything else should be out.
Say again? But you cannot raise a motion to suppress during a trial. It's waived. You have to have done that pre-trial.
Humane practice doctrine, that it just, it's a new issue,
Voluntariness.
That's only going to stop statements or something coming
yeah.
out.
Okay.
On that, just
But-
on that point, one other thing, then you have someone, you know, like Sandra would get up, and she would probably say on redirect to the police officers, so after you did have the chance to make these observations, counsel didn't ask, did you form an opinion? Yes, I did. What was the opinion?
I just want to commend the witness. I wish all of the witnesses that appeared in the West Roxbury Division of the Boston Municipal Court were as prepared as this gentleman, so I think he deserves a round of applause.
That's great. We really are right on time. We're going to have the opportunity to hear Dr. Benjamin now tell us a little bit about this machine. He has some slides for you, and hopefully you'll have some, answer many of your questions, but write down any meaningful questions that you might have for the end, because we're going to have some time.
All right. Yep.
Well, I don't want you to worry because the science is coming. And no one has to do any math. And I'm going to tell you the same thing that I've told every attorney and every judge that I've ever taught to. If you didn't understand math and science when you were in school, it was your teacher's fault because they didn't make it interesting for you. And hopefully by the time I'm finished, you're going to understand and have all your questions answered. Now, Carol, I need a little help with this magic thing here. Please. I don't think this is on.
That doesn't amplify. Oh, that doesn't record.
Shouldn't be a light on. There we go. All right. Now, I'm going to start off very briefly, just talking a little bit about the Daubert case. That's the site. All of these data are in your syllabus material. I even put a summary of the criteria that the Supreme Court came down with for reliability issues. Remember, as was said earlier today, you need to show that evidence is both relevant and reliable. It's relevant if it helps the jury. It's reliable if it meets these criteria. It's important that you see these criteria. First of all, if it's scientific, it can be tested. Second of all, if it's been subjected to peer review. Third, potential error rate. Now that's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about variability in blood-breath ratios, error rate of the machine. Then the existence and maintenance of standards. Now this is very important because before you ever pick up the phone and say, hello, is this Dr. Benjamin, you'll have an opportunity to look at the certifications, the dates, the times that the machine was calibrated, the times that the new calibration check was put in. This is standards and procedures. And then the last one, widespread acceptance within the relevant community. That really is just a restatement of Fry, which goes all the way back to 1923. So now, with that as a background, what happens when you have a few drinks? Now, basically, what happens is that you have a few drinks, and it's not really a discrete number. It's not as if you drink and then you wait a certain fixed time and you drink and you wait. You have a bunch of drinks, and the way it comes out, this is a graph. On the vertical axis is the blood alcohol concentration. On the horizontal axis is time. So if you were to take blood samples, for example, every 15 minutes for the first hour and then every hour after that, this is the kind of a curve that you would get. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to take this curve and starting with the plateau and moving towards the descending portion, I'm going to show you a close-up of it. And that's what it looks like in close-up. If it were possible to break down the individual discrete phases of absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, and those are the four what we call ADME phases, and that holds for all drugs or anything that's taken into the body. If it's injection, the absorption is from the muscle it's injected into the bloodstream. If it's orally, it has to go into the stomach, into the small intestines, and then to the bloodstream. But it will follow those discrete phases. Now, the important thing to know about this is that once you have gone through this upward phase, the absorption phase, you can't do a breathalyzer while the blood level is rising. That's why, both in the CMR and in the Draeger regulations, you have to sit and observe the suspect for 15 to 20 minutes. Part of that reason is to make sure that if there's any ethanol in the stomach or the intestines, it's being absorbed. Another reason that is frequently given is what if the person used a breath spray or has residual mouth ethanol that would potentially skew the results on the testing. Now, in terms of the part, what we call the decline phase or the elimination phase, this is important because as I put this pen here, that is the phase when you can do back extrapolation. I'll explain to you a little bit more about back extrapolation. Back extrapolation means you would start out with a number over here. For example, you knew the blood alcohol at this point in time was, let's say, 0.08, and you wanted to know what it was an hour earlier. You have to make a decision about what the burn-off rate is. And I want you to remember, as a rule of thumb, 0.02 works beautifully all the time, and it's a real easy number for jurors to remember. No, in an individual who weighs 170 pounds and drinks one beer, their blood alcohol will be 0.015 after 30 minutes. A person who weighs 150, their blood alcohol will be 0.017, just a little bit higher. So our fictitious person, was that a hypothetical case that we did, who was 230, that's why I said it would be way under 0.02. Moreover, people always cite the burn-off rate as being 0.017, which was the Widmark number, and I'll show you how all of these numbers are derived. That is the actual arithmetic average or mean. But people who are accustomed to drinking have a higher burn-off rate. It's closer to 0.02, maybe even higher, because they get a little extra help from their body. Their body recognizes that they are burning off or that they are accustomed to drinking ethanol. In an OUI case, Dick, it's really not going to be very helpful to back extrapolate, because if the breathalyzer is some number here and you back extrapolate, it's only going to be higher at the scene. So that's useful in a dram shop case or in other types of liability negligence issues. In OUI, you don't want to find out what it was at the time of the police stop, because it's going to be higher than it was at the time of the breathalyzer test.
On the other hand, the argument is having, or the crime being charged is having a .08 or above while you're driving the car, not while you're in the police station. So if you had just finished drinking and you're still in the absorption stage and you get arrested in the parking lot outside the barroom, there might be something to talk about. But he's absolutely right. I mean, you have that issue. The jury's going to be asked to determine what the number was at the time he was driving the car.
Right. Now, back extrapolation, and I have an article in your materials on back extrapolation. The case that is cited here in the Commonwealth is Commonwealth versus Senior. That's the case that allows back extrapolation. And in that case, the Commonwealth's toxicologist or chemist who testified in that talked about using an upper level range and a lower level range. And that expert is right, because you can do what would be called either a best case scenario, and let me back up, I'm sorry, I missed something.
That was Kevin Reddington's case.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we can blame him for the bad luck.
Notice here that the range of burn-offs is given as from 0.01 to 0.025. So if you add those together, you come out with 0.035, and if you divide that by 2, you come out with 0.017, and that's where the 0.017 burn-off rate comes from, taking those numbers. Now, the 0.01 is a little bit low for most people, and even 0.015 is a little bit low. But if you want to look at what the plus or minus is, what the variability, if it's 0.02, it can be 0.02 plus or minus 0.005. So it could be up to 0.025 or down to 0.015. So you can do the back extrapolation using a best case scenario, which would be the slowest burn-off rate, because you'd only be adding back 0.01 per hour. You can do a worst case scenario using the highest rate, which is 0.025, or you can use the average or the mean, 0.0175. And that's what Commonwealth versus Senior spoke to, and that was what the judiciary liked as well. Now, when you want to do these calculations, this is the formula that I refer to in my mock direct, and that's the Widmark formula. That's been around since around 1935. And what the terms in that refer to is ETOH is the ethanol concentration, specific gravity of ethanol, specific gravity of blood, the person's weight, and the Widmark formula, the Widmark R. Now, one thing that you have to remember is that percent always means grams per 100 milliliters, no matter whether it's the percent of sugar in your coffee or the percent of ethanol in your blood. It's always grams per 100 milliliters. Now, 100 milliliters is the same thing as a deciliter. So when you see blood alcohols come back from hospitals and the number is, let's say, 100 milligrams per deciliter, that's the same as 0.1. Because remember, that's milligrams, and percent is grams per 100. So if it's 100 milligrams, in order to convert milligrams to grams, you have to move the decimal place 3 points. So 1, 2, 3 makes it 0.1. Now you have 0.1 grams per 100 milliliters. So percent is always grams per 100. So when you see numbers in a hospital chart, make sure. People call me and they say, somebody came up to me today, what would this urine alcohol be if it was such and such a number? I said, what are the units? If I don't know the units, I can't tell you what was measured. Now, I have a computer program, and that computer program allows me to put in the amount of ethanol that was consumed, the person's body weight, the burn-off rate, the Widmark R factor, and generate a graph that will show me the blood alcohol as a function of time. If I want to, I can ask the computer to even break it down. So that, for example, here is our 170-pound individual. And that person is drinking 1 beer. And I can tell you that the beer has a ½ ounce of ethanol in it. It's 12 ounces of beer, and it's 4.2% ethanol. So you can see that 4 times 12 is 48. That's where 0.5 ounces comes out. If you want to convert that to grams, there's about 30 grams in an ounce. So 0.5 means that there's 15 grams of ethanol. And if you wanted to see after 30 minutes, here I made arbitrarily at 7 o'clock it was started. At 7:30, there's the 0.015 that I spoke to you about. Now, being a good student of the Dauber case, I went and had this published. I was asked to review this for the Medical Review Officers Journal. And this was a question about whether or not you could get stoned by drinking cough medicine or NyQuil. You certainly can. NyQuil has about 17%. That's like 34, 35 proof. So you can get a blood alcohol from drinking NyQuil or cough medicine or anything. And it's the same calculation that I told you about, how to figure out the amount of ethanol. And the editor liked the program that I used so much, he wanted to put in the citation, and you can find that up on the web, the Easy Out calculator. And just to show you that they don't give out PhDs for nothing, I can do the calculations by hand as well. And I'm prepared to do that on any case that I go into court on. I've already done that by hand because once a very smart attorney asked me to do the Widmark calculation on a chalkboard in the courtroom, and I couldn't do it. That was the first time, and that was the last time. Now, once again, everything I'm telling you is scientifically evidence-based. This is a study showing the elimination rate of ethanol in people who came into the emergency room. You can see 19.6 milligrams per deciliter per hour. I say, 0.02 or 20 milligrams per deciliter, and that's close enough for government work. Pretty close. Now, let's take a look at what the old Intoxilyzer 5000 breathalyzer slip looked like. It has the subjects. I've redacted most of the critical or HIPAA information from these forms. Let's look at the basic test information. First, you have to put air through it. Then you do a subject test, which means you tell the person to start blowing. Then you do another air blank, which means send air through it to clear out the tubing. Then you run the calculation check, which we would call a positive control. This is the one that has to be 0.15, 0.14, or 0.16 in order to be a valid test. Then you let another air test, and then the subject blank, the subject second test. As Dick Zisson told you earlier, the first test and the second test have to be within 0.02 of one another. So this is a valid test according to those criteria. And those are the criteria that are in the CMR in 501, and you have them in your materials. Now, let's take a look at what the new breathalyzer machine test looks like. It's completely different. And once again, I've redacted this information as well. You'll see that there's a lot of additional information on this form that wasn't on the intoxilizer form. For example, what is the time that you first observed the individual? Now here, 10:40 p.m., you see the test was begun at 11, so more than 20 minutes elapsed, 22 minutes. You see the certification of expiration on the instrument. You see the certification for the simulator solution. You see that right here, the simulation solution was 0.155. According to the CMR, it really shouldn't be listed as 0.155. It should be truncated. It should be 0.15. I don't think it makes any real difference, but you can't really measure it out to that third decimal place. Now, let's look at the actual test. The actual test is very similar to what you saw with the Intoxilizer 5000. You see air going through as an air blank. You see a subject test, number 1, at 0.08. You see more air going through. You see a calibration test of 0.15, more air of a blank, another 0.08, and then finally a final air test. Now, in addition, though, notice that with the new machine, you can see how many liters, and a liter is about the size of a quart. It's a little bit bigger, 1.06 quarts. And a liter of air, you can see that this person blew 2.5 liters of air, and it took that person 5.6 seconds to do that. And the second test, they blew 2.8, and then 5.6. Now, if you look at the rate at which they are blowing, you divide the number of liters by the number of seconds that it took, you'll see that it'll come out 0.455 or something to that effect. So that's very important. Also notice the temperature. The temperature was 33.9. These machines are made to function at a centigrade temperature of 34 centigrade. Those of you who have children know that 37 centigrade is the same as 98.6. So this is a pretty warm temperature. It's up in the 90s. Now, look at this test now. Now I'm going to show you a second breathalyzer test.
Before you get there.
Go ahead.
It's not in the book, is it? That last screen?
No.
Thank you.
Before you,
I put the materials for the book together before I got the
Okay,
cases.
I didn't hear that.
can you tell us the impact of the temperature of the person on
Yeah,
this result?
for every degree centigrade that is higher, there's something like a 6.5% or 6.9% increase in the amount of ethanol that comes out of solution.
This person doesn't have to have a fever.
No,
Just
this
a
is without
slight
having-
variation in their
Right.
body temperature. Not everyone has 98.6.
It's not even body temperature, Dick. It's the temperature of the air coming out of their lungs. And there's indications to show that just from the blowing procedure, the temperature of the air will rise a couple of degrees centigrade in the actual expiration process. Now let's look at this second breathalyzer test. All the other materials pretty much the same, but look at this. This guy blew 1.7 liters, and it took 10 seconds. That's a rate now of 0.17 as opposed to 0.55. This guy was blowing his heart out and could barely get 1.7 liters in his first expiration. And look at the second one, 2.3. Now let me put these two up beside. Okay, you can see what a big difference. This fellow blows 2.5 liters in 5.6 seconds, and this one blows about 30% less air in almost twice as amount of time. So right there, if that doesn't show you that there's an awful lot of variability and a lot of difficulty in blowing. Now, I want you to know, these cases, I haven't done these cases in court yet. But I'm going to collect all these cases, and I'm going to write a paper and publish it on the variability of these forced expirations, and I'm going to publish it at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences or one of the peer review organizations, and then I'm going to have that in court when I go into court. Here's another thing that I noticed in this case when I looked at it. Here's the first time that, excuse me, wrong slide here. First time that they observe this person is 10:18, but they start the test at 10:37. That's less than 20 minutes. So I'm going to have to bring that to the attorney's attention too. Now, of course, the actual test didn't start until 10:38, but it'll be up to the court and it'll be up to the litigators to determine whether or not that's a valid test, whether or not they met the criteria of waiting 20 minutes. So there are a lot of important things to look at. Look at the temperature on this one. This one is above 34 degrees, whereas the other one was 33.9. So if I told you that it's going to increase by about 7 or 8%, 6.9% for a 1 degree change, then it's at least a 0.6% increase for a 1/10 of a degree. Yes?
What temperature is that?
Say again?
Whose temperature is that?
That's the temperature of the simulator solution. See the heading?
Right.
All right, that's the simulator solution that was used to generate this 0.16 here in the cal check. And that's supposed to be 34.
Is it another function that they can have in this new machine is that you could test, depending on if the police department has paid the extra money to test the...
I'm not hearing you.
Can't the machine also test the temperature of the person's breath if they're actually blowing? Would that also...
I believe that there is, yes. The question was, can the machine also measure the temperature of the expired air? I believe there's a gadget that you can order if you want to put it on the machine.
There's an option.
Yeah.
2 states have it. Alabama, believe it or not, and Germany. That's it.
Germany isn't a state, it's a country.
It's a country, all right.
It's a state of confusion. So, they call themselves a republic. Res publica, okay. So at any rate, there's a lot of information to be gleaned from these slips. Now, once again, according to the AMA and their publication on alcohol and the impaired driver, in the fasting state, if you drink a beer or a glass of wine or a shot of liquor or scotch on the rocks, about 15 minutes you reach your peak. And at about 20 minutes, more than 80 or 90% of it will be absorbed. So, did I read that right? Maximum blood, peak around 20 minutes and 80 to 90% complete absorption within 30 to 60. And that has to do with whether or not it's carbonated or non-carbonated. For example, if you drink champagne as opposed to non-sparkling white wine, the champagne, the alcohol will get in faster because the carbonation is more acidic. It's carbonic acid, like when I used to work in Brigham's and make those great ice cream sodas. It's carbonic acid. That's water, CO2 dissolved in water. That's all it is. So that's one of the reasons why you have to sit for 15 or 20 minutes before you take the breathalyzer test. All right, now let's look at the actual physiology of the breathalyzer. If this is what the lungs look like, this is a general section of what the lungs look like. Down in the bottom of the lungs, what is called the deep expired air in the statutes and so forth, are these little things that look like clusters of grapes, and we call them the alveoli. And those are the places in the lung where actual gas exchange occurs. The lining of these air sacs is only 1 cell thick. It's just a capillary. And what you have on one side is that blood capillary that has the alcohol dissolved in it. And on the other side, you have the inside of that alveolus, the singular, with the air inside. And that's where that 1 to 2100 ratio comes in as an average. That the amount of ethanol in 1 milliliter of that blood on this side of the capillary will be represented by 2100 milliliters of deep air. Not the air in the upper part of your lungs, not what you do when you go or cough or blow up a balloon like that. You're only blowing from up here. You're not blowing deep air. That's why some people have difficulty. And one of the problems with this ALCO test, this Draga, is that they found in both Pennsylvania and in New Jersey, about 16% of the people cannot produce a sufficient amount of air to get a test. And what happens? That goes down as a refusal. And in New Jersey, in the case law that just came through, the judge said anybody producing more than half a liter of air, which you can determine by reading the breathalyzer slip. If you've produced more than 0.5 liters of air in your test and you don't get an accurate test, that cannot be put down as a refusal, and the person cannot be penalized for that in the same way as if they refuse the breathalyzer. Why? Because the typical number of people to fail, like with an intoxilizer, is closer to 5%, not 3 times as high. So there's going to be a big problem with this machine as we get rolling on it, not only here in the Commonwealth, but it's already been determined in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. And that's the basis for which I'm sharing this information with you.
Dr. Benjamin, isn't it true that an adjustment can be made to the machine itself to allow less pressure necessary to do this?
I'm not specifically familiar. If you know about it, go ahead and...
No, I'm wondering. I thought I had read something about it.
You know, the size of the mouthpiece, the diameter of the mouthpiece, how long the hose is, but a lot of it, I think, is intrinsic in the actual machine inside, because the back pressure is just too bad. A person cannot do it. How many people have ever taken a breathalyzer test, even in a simulation? You have to blow like hell to get that thing to work. It is not just a simple thing. You have to really exert a lot of force. And part of the reason for that is to make sure that you're not delivering an air sample that's up on the top. As a matter of fact, the machines have in them what are called slope detectors. And then what that means is that that can determine the speed at which the air is coming out of your lungs and into the machine. And if it's coming out too quickly, it means it's higher air. It's not lower air. So the machine starts to say, false test, bad test. So that's very important. Now, here's a close-up of what the deep lung air sacs look like. And we always learn in anatomy, it's just looks like a cluster of grapes. Now, how does the machine work? The machine works basically, this is the chemical structure for ethanol up here. This is what an infrared spectrum looks like. This is the amount of absorption, and these are the different wavelengths. Don't be confused by it. It is really simple. There is a straightforward relationship called the Lambert-Beer law. This doesn't mean drinking beer. There was some guy named Dr. Beer, and he happened to get his name into a breathalyzer equation. Just a coincidence. But the way it actually works is the following. If you had a light, and you shined a light through this bottle, and you had a detector on the other side of the bottle that was able to measure how much light was coming through. And this could be just from a flashlight. It does, forget about infrared. Don't even worry about that part. Let's say I had an eyedropper here with some black ink in it. And I put 1 drop of black ink into this, and I switched it up, and I shined the light through it. The detector would detect less light on the other side, because the black ink is obscuring the path of the light. And if I added another drop, it would be even darker, and even less light would get through, and so forth and so on. That's the Beer-Lambert relationship. All that says is that the greater the concentration of ethanol in the actual solution or in the machine that's being tested that comes out of your ear, the more that this machine is going to register that there's more ethanol there. Why? Because they've picked a wavelength that is specific for ethanol absorption. And they've picked one where there is not supposed to be interfering substances, like the most common one would be acetone that a diabetic could form inside of their body. But I had a case a few weeks ago of a fellow who worked in a layout shop, and he was using adhesives and chemicals. And he inhaled all those fumes. And he was definitely impaired when he was pulled over, because those chemicals can impair you. but he wasn't impaired on ethanol. He was impaired on the fumes from the chemicals. Some of you have done cases with volatile organic chemicals, or you know chemicals like xylene and toluene and methylethyl ketone. All of these chemicals are very similar. They're all central nervous system depressants, and they can all cause impairments. You would do just as poorly on a field sobriety test with that as if you had a real load on from ethanol. It's indistinguishable. Now, in the ALCO test, in addition to having this infrared sensor, there is a second sensor. It's called an electrochemical sensor. And it measures the ethanol by a different electrochemical method. In that machine, the measurement of the ethanol by the infrared part has to agree with the electrochemical, or else you will not get a valid reading. So this is supposed to be a backup to show the reliability of that machine. And when I get to my CD, which I'm going to put on in a couple of minutes, you'll see how that machine works. Now, regarding what I was telling you about the variability in the population, this is kind of a bell-shaped curve. And this all comes from a presentation I did at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. So basically, before I even went into court, I had my proposed attack on the breathalyzer, if you will, peer-reviewed by 100 forensic scientists in a room. So, and it came out of the literature. And that's why it's very difficult to refute. That this is the mean, this is the variability, this is for 95% of the population, 1 to 1900 to 1 to 29, and for 99%, this is 1 to 1500 and 1 to 3100, just what I cited earlier in the mock direct. This is the table put together by Dr. Dabowski a number of years ago to show the stages of impairment or effects from ethanol. You see that under 0.05, it's basically sobriety, and you know that the Code of Massachusetts regulation says that if you blow a breathalyzer that's 0.05 or less, you go home. Interesting that it doesn't say if you back extrapolate that to the time you were stopped. It says if you blow it right then and there, no matter what time it is, and on your breathalyzer, it's 0.05, you go home. So the Commonwealth recognizes that the threshold level for any effects is 0.05, because if you blow 0.05, you go home. 0.08, you're under the influence or statutorily. 0.06, 0.07, it's discretionary. It's based on the police officer's assessment of how you respond to your field sobriety test, how you look, and maybe by the grace of God also. But these are the continuum. Now notice that these ranges overlap. This is a continuum. Moreover, effects of mind-altering drugs, whether it's ethanol or cocaine or marijuana or heroin or whatever, are situational, meaning if you do them at a wedding, you'll get high. If you do them at a funeral, you'll cry. So the same person who's laughing with a lampshade on his head one time is crying in his beer later on that night. And you've seen these same things happen. They're related to expectation. They're related to social setting. They're related to your experience with that drug or with that ethanol. They're related to your tolerance. They're related to how fast it was absorbed. They're related to when the last time was that you drank. They're related to any other medications that you may be taking, prescribed, over-the-counter, or illicit drugs. All of those factors and your basic tolerance have to be considered. And that's why experts are required to make an interpretation. The same publication on alcohol and the impaired driver. This is the citation here. This table is the table that's in your materials. You see once again down at the bottom that a 0.05% is the same as 100 milligrams per deciliter. So that's the way you can remember that. Now, this says visible intoxication. Now, it's very important that you bear in mind that the OUI standard is a standard for impairment. And Sandra, you were very good in pointing that out. It means that you're not normal. You can't drive. Who's normal? It means that you can't drive the car or operate the motor vehicle in a safe manner. You're impaired. In a dram shop case, your standard is visible intoxication or signs of visible intoxication. That generally is closer to a 0.15 level, because you see here between 0.1 and 0.15, 62% of the population is visibly intoxicated. That's 6 out of 10. And when you cross over the 0.15 line and go from 0.15 to 0.20, it goes up to 89%, or approximately 9 out of 10. So it's a 1.5-fold jump. So that 0.15 is frequently the number that's used in the forensic toxicology community as signs of visible intoxication. A person can be impaired but not be observable as intoxicated. And that would be people who pass their field sobriety test but still blow a high number on the breathalyzer or have a blood alcohol that's very high. Now, I want to show you one brief case that I did here in the Commonwealth. This was the one that I mentioned to Judge Rufo that I had a Daubert hearing on. This was a gentleman who I showed you his breathalyzer earlier, his first breathalyzer. At midnight, he's blowing a 0.11. You see that? It's about 18 minutes after midnight. He makes bail. He goes over to the Mass General Hospital to get a blood test. He said, I couldn't have drank enough to get my blood alcohol. He gets in there at 1:15 and he claims his blood test was drawn at 1:30. We get the blood test back. Here's the blood test. 585. What are the units? This is milligrams per liter. This is actually also a serum determination. What do you do when you have a serum ethanol concentration? You have to convert it to whole blood. And you do that basically by lowering it 15%. So if I multiply this figure by 0.85, I come up with about 0.04. Now, to get from milligrams per liter, you would move the decimal place 1 point. That's 58 milligrams per deciliter, or 100 milliliters. And then to convert milligrams to grams, it's 3 more decimal places. 1, 2, 3 makes that 0.05. Or the converted number came out to be 497, but then you have to drop off the 97 because we're truncating, so it comes out to 0.04. He says, I was 0.04. But here's what happened. Look at the time on this. Here's the time is 5:15 a.m., but it's listed as login time. After the Daubert hearing, I said to the attorney, you've got to subpoena the hospital record of the time that the blood sample was drawn. A login sample is when it came to the lab and was logged in. I said, if you don't have the actual lab slip that says the time the blood was drawn, we're going to have a problem establishing exactly what time that blood was drawn. He subpoenaed it. The hospital didn't show up with the result. He called me from the court. He said they wouldn't show up, they didn't bring in the lab slip, and the judge wants to go today. And I said, well, we can't go. You've got to get the judge to compel the production of that lab slip, because without that lab slip to tell me the time that blood sample was drawn, I can't do the back extrapolation. I can't nail down the fact that your client was actually 0.04 plus, let's say, another 0.02 or 0.03 to back extrapolate to the time it took the guy to get from the police station to the hospital. But the judge wanted to move that case along. And as a result, what happened was the fellow was found guilty, and we really should have gotten him off. The other part of it, of course, is that the defendant was represented by his brother, which is interesting. But it was sad, and every time I've lectured to the judiciary down in Florida, I've always said to them, be a little more lenient and understand that sometimes some time-sensitive or date-sensitive material is very critical to proving a defense, and it's more important than just having one more continuance. But that's the information that I pass on to the lawyers who retain me. How far that gets when it goes up to the bar, I have no control over that. So that's the basic primer on blood alcohol and breathalyzer physiology. Why don't I take some questions on this before we move on, and then Carol, you can get me ready for phase 2, please. Any questions on what I've talked about so far? Yes, sir.
On the breath slip of the current machines, the newer machines, it'll say 1.5, sometimes it'll say 1.6. And that's permissible, sometimes it'll say 1.5.
You're talking about the calculator. Yeah.
Can you do the argument that because it says 1.6, it's obviously reading a little bit higher, the the amount that was in the sample, therefore, it would stand to reason that your 1.0 is actually an 0.9?
Probably pursuant to statute, you can't make that argument, but you can say that there is an, remember earlier in my direct, I said that there was an inherent 0.01 over 0.15, or 1 part over 15, or which turns out to be 6.5% inherent variability. It's probably, you're probably not going to be able to say that just because the standard read 0.16 instead of 0.15, that everything is higher. Because the code says it can be 14, 15, or 16, and it meets those requirements. However, through your expert, you can get in that that does imply some variability. But that's really a question for lawyers and judges to answer. I've given you my scientific response, but it certainly doesn't have the same weight as, Judge Coffey, do you have a response to that, gentleman? Okay.
If there's two readings, the first one is a 1.4, and the second reading, the subject test is a 1.6, so it's within the parameters. Is that any indication that there's a rise in blood alcohol, or is it too close together?
No, see, the statute says it has to be within 0.02, and they have to use the lower number.
Right, but if you're looking at it, and I want to make a decision whether I want to go retrograde,
There's no,
no.
you don't want to go retrograde, because if it's a fair test and it's in the post-absorptive phase, you're in the downward slope of the curve, which means if you go backwards, it's got to be higher.
Okay.
It's got to be higher. So it can't really help.
So
But
1.4, 1.6,
but the 1.6 will never come in. It has to be the 1.4 that comes in. It should not, the 1.6 should not come in, because my reading of the statute says that it has to be the lower number if there are two. But the test is a valid test if they're within 0.02.
I have a question for Judge Coffey. Judge, on that, the statute does say it has to be the lower, but as a matter of practicality, doesn't the case itself come in, showing the 1.6?
Well, I think you'd have to ask to have it sanitized.
Have it sanitized.
Can we use the mic?
The answer was that defense counsel would ask to have it sanitized.
Yes, sir.
So you could not suggest from that it's still in the exhaustive stage because the later one is higher than the earlier one?
No, you couldn't, because actually it should be going down. But I think what it really just shows is that there's just a limitation to the intrinsic sensitivity of the machine. And the Commonwealth recognizes, and that's why it says it's got to be within 0.02. It really does. Sometimes, I think we had another slip where you would think it would go lower if it's in the downward phase, or it would stay the same. But I think the machine just isn't really sensitive enough to discriminate between those two numbers. I think that's the scientifically valid answer. Ma'am? Sure. Here's the best way that I can relate it to you. We have Valentine's Day coming up next week, and all of you beautiful ladies put perfume on. Now, where do women put perfume? You put it up here next to the carotid arteries. You put it here on here where the arteries come through, because warmth causes things to volatilize and come out of solution. And the essence in a perfume is really not any different than if I have a glass here that, let's say that this is half vodka and half water. There's ethanol dissolved in this. If I take a Bic lighter and I warm this up, the smell of the ethanol is going to come out. How about people, anyone a cognac drinker? Do you ever warm your cognac up in the microwave or run it under hot water? People always warm up cognac because when they put it in a brandy snifter, isn't that what they call it? So because they like the smell, because it's an aromatic. And when you warm it up, things will come out of solution. So the simulator solution at a higher temperature than 34 will have more ethanol coming out. And what is that breathalyzer machine doing? What it's doing is it's drawing off the air on the top of the simulator solution that's supposed to be in equilibrium with that solution of ethanol. And it's taking the air off the top and measuring the ethanol in that air. And that amount is proportional to what is supposed to be the assayed or analytical amount of ethanol in here, which is 0.15%. But we know that in the Alka-Test machine, it's what's called an open system. It's not closed. And that ethanol is going to continue to volatilize. And that's why, as Dick said before, Sometimes you have to change that simulator every 30 days because the ethanol comes out of solution, and that simulator is no longer a valid indication to calibrate that instrument. And that's another problem.
What I'd like to do is have you focus on
All right.
this particular machine, because that's why we're all here.
All right.
And it's late in the day.
This really is not anywhere as near as important as what we're talking about
Okay.
here. I can tell you. No, seriously, I don't mean to be facetious, but it'll show you pictures of how the machine does, but it's not going to give you the mental hardware.
My sense is that we all want to know how to attack the significance of the machine. Now, if we don't need a demonstrative aid, that's okay.
No,
But if you can tell us about how this particular machine is vulnerable.
There
that's
was
what
one other question, or yes, no, maybe? Okay, fair enough. Let's look at this now. This is the presentation that the managing director of Draeger came over from Germany to do in the Daubert hearing in New Jersey. This isn't important. This is important. This is just his. Now, that's what the machine looks like. Dr. Dabowski, who had the Dabowski table that I showed you, and that's in your materials, these are his criteria for what an adequate test is. They're very similar to what are in the CMR. They're good criteria, and so are our CMR. You have to stay without drink for 15 minutes. 20-minute period to make sure that everything is absorbed and make sure that there's no mouth ethanol. An air blank before the breath test, to a purge between and another air blank. 2 separate consecutive. You can see it's the same as the old CMR. 2 separate consecutive breath tests. And a third one if the first 2 aren't in agreement. I don't believe that that's operative in Massachusetts. And as I told you, there are 2 different ways in the new Draeger machine. There's the infrared and there's the electrochemical method. And those 2 methods have to agree within the machine. The machine talks to itself, as a lot of us do, and determines whether it's valid or not. They have a control test with every breath. Control test before and after the breath test, and then if the numbers fall within the required statistics, then it's a valid test. That's what the inside of the machine looks like, and this is what we're talking about with both an infrared and an electrochemical analysis. Now you're going to see close-ups of each one of the individual parts of this machine. In the back, this is where you plug it all in. It doesn't look very much different than the back of your computer. In the front, you can see the same type of a thing in the connectors. And now, this is the sample chamber. That's the chamber that when you blow in, you don't blow in 2,100 milliliters of air. You blow in about 70 milliliters of air that are taken into the sample chamber. And you can see at the top where it says EC sensor. That's where it takes a part of that breath sample that goes into the infrared and sends it to the electrochemical detector too. So, and then they feed back how much they each analyze that sample and to make sure that they're the same order of magnitude. This is what Draeger says. This is what the fuel cell, the electrochemical detector, looks like. This is a schematic of it. It has a membrane that allows it to come in. It's an electrochemical test with oxidation. As the electrochemical oxidation occurs, there's a readout and a sensor, and that's all proportional to the amount of ethanol in the sample. This is just a view, different side view of the same thing. That's a complete view of the way the fuel cell works. It has 2 electrodes in it, and it's an electrochemical, not infrared absorption. It's a different method. By the way, Draeger claims that this absolutely is dispositive about showing that there are no other interfering substances, like acetone, for example. So they use sulfuric acid as the electrolyte. Electrolyte is just water, does not conduct electricity very well. If you put salt into it or you put an acid that ionizes, it will conduct electricity, and that's why they have to use the sulfuric acid. They have a signal transducer, which converts the electrochemical information into the number of microamps, and then that's read by a computer and converted to an actual concentration amount. The chamber is within the machine. The cuvette that they refer to is like a quartz glass, so it doesn't distort the passage of the light through it. This is just promotional. Same thing, you saw this slide before. This is the standards and the states that have used this, other countries where it's been used. This is the simulator. And the simulator is the known concentration of ethanol, that's 0.15, and that's the one that's used to calibrate the instrument. Has to be at a constant temperature, as you see, 34 degrees with a plus or minus 0.2. When I showed you the two breathalyzer slips before, one was 33.9, one was 34.1. So they're within the plus or minus 0.2. They're only 0.1 off. This is the way you go about how you would actually start the machine and how you would do the calibration and the control test. This is how you would set it up when you initialize the machine. It's not any different than setting up your fax machine and putting in your phone number and your name and what you want on the header. Same thing as to how to utilize it. There are, as you can see, mouthpieces, plural. So Dick, you're absolutely right. There are different mouthpieces that can go in. One with a small hole, obviously, is harder to blow into than one with a larger hole. Theoretically, when the positive control is no longer valid, you get an automatic signal that should tell you to replace it, take out the old, put in the new. And look at the operator manual. By the way, in your materials, you will see that I have taken out of the operator manual several tables and it looks like this. They're on page 109 and 108. This should be a cross-examiner's dream. These are the limitations of the machine and the things to look for. So in addition to looking at the certification numbers and the dates and whether or not it's passed and so forth, look at all of those criteria and be prepared to be able to look at the machine or to look at the slip and determine if compliance was achieved. And that's it. I told you it's an interesting set of slides, but it doesn't contribute that much overall knowledge. It just shows you what it looks like.
Questions? Yes, sir.
You said that the machine automatically aborts if the two samples are not within .02 of each other?
That's what it's supposed, I don't know if aborts, but it'll say invalid sample, or it won't register a result.
And is there a printout of that?
Sure, just the ones that I showed you. It should print out on
Would
that.
there be a printout, would that be preserved so that you can question the reliability of the machine?
My impression is yes, but I'm not absolutely certain. It's a very good question, and I understand why you're asking it.
I don't think there's a CMR on that. I don't think she's written one yet. But when that comes up, she'll write one.
Are they numbered? The old test used to be numbered, they had to keep in sequence. There was, there's a 9024K, I think. I'm not counting it if I know it. I'm just saying the old statute says that you have to keep the tests in sequential numbered tickets. Are these tickets sequentially numbered as it calls for in, give me a guess, 9024K or P?
There is a registration number on each one of those things, but it's a case number. I don't know if each, when I put the overheads up, there's a case number, which is the case for that jurisdiction, for that police station.
Don't know if they've made the change in answer to you.
That's right.
It's a very, very good question.
The other thing is, if you can go back, or if you can't 2 slides ago that said solution 30 and solution days 50, or vice versa. Does that mean that they have to, is that what Mr. Zissin was talking about, that it's 50, but really you gotta do 2 tests, so it's 22 or some such language? There was a picture on the screen that had capital letters, SOLN with a number 30, SOLN with a number 50 in parentheses. Back,
Yeah, I can't.
What I was
get-
referring
can't
to
get
is
it
the
work.
testimony of the president of the company. I don't know if it's put in the materials.
if those are the slides you had.
Yeah, those are the slides, but I don't know how to get there. I'm not
Okay, fine.
familiar with this.
Okay.
Any other quick questions? Because we want to have you fill out this evaluation, get you out of here because of
The
the snow.
simulators, is it 30, 40 degrees and then it's plus or minus .02 above that, then
Plus or minus 0.2, not 0.02.
.2?
It's usually 1.5 or 1.6.
No. You're talking about the internal calculator check. He's talking about the temperature.
Okay, sorry.
Temperature is supposed to be 34, but 34.1 and 33.9 are acceptable. Actually, according to Draeger, 39.8 and 33.8 and 34.2 would be the upper and lower ranges on temperature.
And if it's above or below those, it's out.
It should be out. It's not within the specs. And remember, the specs, standards and procedures as in Daubert, those specify too. So you have a Daubert basis for making a claim to exclude it. Yes, sir.
All of it simplified. If it's within the specs, the slip is within the spec, then according to the Commonwealth, that's valid .08 per se. Is that correct?
Correct.
Well, that
valid
makes it
test.
admissible. The
Right.
question is, it's still subject to attack.
That's right. That's the right answer. That's the right answer.
That was the second part of the question.
Yeah, that means that it can at least come in according to jurisprudence.
And the
It doesn't.
only way to attack it is through expert testimony on the variability of the.
Of all the parameters that we've talked about.
Or as George has said, cross-examination of the operator.
Right, I was going to say, you don't have to retain an expert to do it. You can bring in the person who actually administered the breath test, and you can ask that person the same questions. You can also get them to produce the manual in advance, which was also, I think George suggested that earlier today, which I highly recommend.
The machine manual.
Yes.
Just on the CD, I noticed in the top left corner, Microsoft PowerPoint. Can you get that?
No,
Okay, fine, just checking.
no.
This has been terrific. I hope you've appreciated the time that went in with these folks that volunteered here today. And I want to thank you all for coming. There's an orange sheet in your materials. Hopefully, since the law school is putting on these programs on a regular basis, we like to see which programs are the strongest. So if you could fill out those materials before you leave today. I wish to thank you on behalf of the law school, on behalf of the participants here, and I'd like to have a round of applause for our participants. Thank you.
You can give me the evaluations.
David.
Right.
Sure. Yes. I don't know. Yes, they want to talk about CLE credit. They get CLE.
Send them out week after the program to everybody.
Quite some time now.
So how do you know who showed up? Did you check, did you catch your name off this morning?
Oh, when we picked up.
Right,
Oh,
right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
She's taking.
Thank you. I've been in all three, actually. West Roxbury, Dorchester, and Chelsea. How we doing?
I want
See you later.
Yeah, I know, a lot of
He's still gonna see everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you did a good job.
I know I'll have a career in the concert.
Are you in private practice now?
I'm sort of in between at the moment. I'm interviewing with the AGs and DOJ.
Thank you very much.